even as someone that's very much, should I share this on the internet? Hello, I know that it's already 2025, but I want to talk about all the books that I read in 2024. I read 17 books in 2024. My goal was 12, and I'm going to keep having the goal of at least 12 books, so it averages to about a book a month. The first one I read was the book that I started in late 2023, and I didn't finish it till May of 2024 because I was reading really slow and I was reading it at work, but it was the Charity and Sylvia, A Same-Sex Marriage in Early America. I rated this 8.8 out of 10. It was talking about how the opportunities for queer relationships existed more in rural as opposed to urban communities, contrary to what you would assume, because it just was an open secret. And it gave a real example of these two women in New England in the 1800s, I believe it was. I really did enjoy it. It showed photos of their houses. It gave documents collected by historians that read through different letters to amongst themselves, to their family, to their loved ones, that helped demonstrate the approval of their families, disapproval from other things, and like how they lived together and what their relationships were like, the story of their lives together. From the moment they met till the moment they died, they were locked in, and it was just great to see truth, that honesty, and that experience as a queer person, to see the community they fostered, to see their relationships with their religion still being able to exist and continue. There was a lot more focus on their sex and sexuality than I was expecting, but I still learned a lot. The next book that I read was Iron Widow. I can't wait for the second book in the series. It was so good. I rated this an 8 out of 10. I was devouring this book. I think I've explained what hungry reading means to me because I'm a slow reader, but I get super excited and I'll like try and skim to quickly figure out what happens to get to the resolve. And so I'm like skipping details, and then I tell myself like, calm down, slow down, chew your food, chew the words, and then I have to keep rereading over and over because I'm trying to skip ahead because I'm getting too excited to read. Like, there's different parts of the writing that I cut slack for. This is definitely someone's first book, and you can tell even from the beginning of the book to the end just how the story progresses. And I'm excited to see what's next because the story's still amazing. I still was super invested. Certain plot points could have been more drawn out. Not everything needs to be as straightforward as it was given, but it was still nice when you got the information that you needed. The next book that I read was Censor by Junji Ito. This was the first work that I fully completed and read by him. I've seen a lot of clips, seen a lot of stories. I've seen different cosplays, and I was like, okay, I really gonna have to start to read and find some of this stuff. And then I got it as a gift. I rated this one in 8.7. I did think that it was going to be scarier because of the way people talk about it, but I still was invested in the story and really liked it. So I feel like it was a good first book to get into for him. Then I read Shiver by Junji Ito, and this was a collection of 9 short stories, some of which like had like a existential fear that really sat with me as opposed to others. And then I got to talk with them with my sister who read some of them, and I think my brother started reading it, so it's like nice to have it shared with my family. I rated this a 9 out of 10 because I thought these ones were scarier. They hit me different, and the artwork is beautiful, and because there's so many different stories, you get to have such a range. And 2 of the ones in this specific edition, this collection, were iconic ones that I'd heard of and seen cosplays of, so I was excited to read it. The next book that I read was Nana by Emile Zola. This book ate down. I rated this a 9.3. This one, it took me a long time to read, again because I primarily read at work during my breaks. I'm not reading so much at home unless the book really gets me. I wanted to give it a 10 out of 10, but I was like, if it really was, like, I would have done more hungry reading. I would have been more invested. Well, I was super invested, but like I feel like I would have read it quicker. But it was so good. It felt just like people watching. I love the way that it was written, that you were just dropped in. I loved learning about the history of realistic literature, I think what it was. The copy that I had gave like a history of the author, a timeline of the author's works, and like the things that he did. It was so cool to learn about. This was a controversial piece by him because it centers around a sex worker, a prostitute, and like humanizes them, and it was written in like 19th century France or something. In the back of the book as well, it showed different critiques from people of the time and later and what they thought about the writing in the books. You really just feel dropped in. You're introduced to all these characters. It takes a while to keep up, but you're still invested because it's just people watching. It's just like, oh my gosh, what did he do? And who did what? And why are they doing that? And what are they talking about? It's really cool to see. The next book I read, I'll Give You the Sun. I wanted to give it a 3, and I wanted to give it an 8. So I gave it a 5.5. This was a reread. I read this book when I was in high school and I remembered loving it. I was like, this book is so good. It's so interesting. I loved the concept of it. I loved the plot. Rereading it as an adult? No. It really made me have to start creating a discussion about sexuality and hypersexuality of teens in books and whether it's needed or whether it's like, okay, like it really had me having to think about this because I'm like, why am I reading about X, Y, and Z sexuality for these people? I'm not a person that wants to shame sexuality in teens, and I think that there's different things that should be represented for them so that they know how to do it safely and healthily and with proper understanding of themselves, their bodies, and the bodies of the people that they're having sex with, as well as the consequences of sex and sexuality and what that means for them and how to do it safely. Reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive understanding for teens is really important and something I'm clearly passionate about. But reading it, like about a 13-year-old jacking off and his sexual thoughts, I'm like, okay, that's really uncomfortable for me. But I also have different comforts with that regardless. About reading sex and sexuality or whatever, that's my own personal thing that I need to get over. But reading it for teens felt really uncomfortable and it just didn't feel as necessary. And when there's so much sex in young adult books, I'm like, I get it. Teens are horny. They want to have the things centered around themselves because it's okay for them to sexualize themselves because that's what they're sexually attracted to as a teenager. Like, that's fair, that's understanding, but it's an adult that wrote this book. You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, you really sat and wrote this, and that's all I can think about. And there was also a bit of hypocrisy that happened with different age gaps and just description of those feelings and how that changed that really like hindered my ability to commit to a high reading, even though the actual plot, the connections between the characters, their experiences, I thought was really good and well written and interesting. But just these things, I'm like, I can't rate this high. I don't know. It made me think. The next thing that I read about a boy, rate this a 9. It was like my 3rd or 4th time starting this book because I tried reading it a bunch of times growing up, but I would always like fall asleep and lose my page or lost the book or like didn't read it. So I finally actually sat down, committed to reading it and read it. 8 down. I really liked it. 5th time's the charm. I wrote in my notes. I just remembered starting it. I never remember finishing the book. I assumed that it was going to be unlikable, but I was wrong. I was politely disappointed. It was really interesting to experience their lives, to see these different thoughts, the contradicting perspectives, having like a narrator who you like seems kind of unlikable, but you still enjoy the reading of the book and then grow to like them a bit more, grow to understand them and just like see different things. Wasn't hungry reading, but I wanted to continue. I wanted to know what was happening next. I was still invested in the story and the characters. Forever for a Year. I rated this a 7.5. Read this book and it seemed so familiar that I was like, did I read this book in high school? I swore that I did. It seemed so familiar and so connected. It could have just had like recurrent tropes or themes, so maybe I didn't read it, but I feel like I did. Can't rate it too high because of the descriptive teen sexuality, as I was talking about with I'll Give You the Sun. Now when I'm older and I read young adult books, in my head I'll put them older if there's sexuality in the books because of how they're written. They're meant to be from the perspective of teens, so you can't care for the characters as deeply because you're judging them more harshly because you're viewing them as adults when they're making teenage decisions or teenage reactions. Sometimes the writing, when they are having them sexual and doing those kinds of things and they put their ages as young but are treating them as if they're older, those are easier to read and like delude yourself that they're older. But what makes me uncomfortable with that is that why did the author choose to make them 16? They could have just had them be adult. But a lot of the book, it felt really real and raw for like what a teenager would experience in their first love, their first heartbreak, and these kinds of experiences. So I think I'm more apt to recommend this because of the way it portrayed everything, even the teen sexuality. It made me uncomfortable that certain things were descriptive. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's also like some of it was like descriptive in like a way that to help like a teen get through and like relate to the feelings. I don't know. So it's back to my like, how do I feel about this? Is it okay? Is it not okay? That kind of thing. The next book I read was Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI. This book I rated a 10. I'd never read the book. I hadn't really even heard of it until my partner gave it to me. She had to read it in high school, like it was part of the curriculum. Fucking crazy. I'm like, why the fuck did I never learn about this? How could I not know about this? Why is this not well understood and well talked about? And I know the answer. It's because natives are like not acknowledged. Like so much of their history and the history of this fucking country is not acknowledged and not talked about and not taught in schools when it should be. I have so many personal thoughts about this because I am Native person, but also a Native person that's separated from their culture due to just like how the world works and like how it's perpetuated itself and how we've been stripped from our culture, pulled away from it, and trying to get back into it and what that means and how that works and just all that fuckery and bullshit. So I'm extra like sensitive to this type of stuff and interested in it, but it's just crazy. It had a different type of discomfort and an unsettling feeling separate from like my usual discomfort with like how the world works, because I belong to so many different identities, so many different marginalized identities. I have strong thoughts about a lot of things that I am embedded in the culture of, that I have direct impacts of. But reading about this and just becoming more aware, I'm like, how the fuck did we not talk about this? How do we not know about this? It's fucking crazy. I think everyone should read this book. Maybe not every Native, because it's like triggering. I think it's important to learn and have these histories told, but it's not necessary to like traumatize yourselves when it's your own history. There was so much effort and detail to say as accurate, to highlight the history, to really bring it together. The next book I read was Room. I'd seen the movie a couple years ago. What is his name? Jacob Tremblay. Ate down as he always does. Another quick read. Rated this book a 10 as well. The way it was written was so clear and so visual. Like, you can see the room. You're in the room. You really get it. You really understand. The book was solely from Jack's perspective, or like the young boy, which really, like, as opposed to the movie, really changes like how you view things, how you understand things. Really like makes you think. Being from an outside perspective and being from as an adult, I caught myself like judging this child or being like, no, you don't understand, but he literally doesn't understand. Like, it's a kid. It's all different for him. It's all scary. It's overwhelming. It's overstimulating. There's so many things going on that he does not understand. And you have to be like, oh wow, like this is just a kid going through this, experiencing this. We may understand things differently. We do understand things differently, but that's the whole fucking point. It was so good and so easy to understand, easy to follow, like easy to, beautiful. The next book I read was Suspect by Scott Turow. I rated this book an 8.8. It was interesting to read something so modern. It was set in a post-COVID world with references to COVID. It threw me off because I'm not used to things being so present. The main character was almost a manic pixie dream girl, but was toxic and acknowledged her faults. And I love that the book wasn't too relationship heavy and that the twists weren't too predictable. The next book I read was The Appeal. I rated this a 7.6. It's a fiction story, but it was like via emails, letters, text messages, so you're not like reading a cohesive story as you're trying to put things together. It was a whodunit story, so it's like trying to figure out who done it, but there were so many characters, hard to follow a bit. I don't know if I just wasn't like smart enough to like pick on different things. The way they were putting things together, I'm like, how are you getting from point A to point B? I'm like, okay, this is the result, but like, how did we get here? And it makes me wonder about the process of the writing of the book, and if they decided the ending at first, or like how it all went about. I was like, okay, it was still good to read, but sometimes it felt like things were just thrown together instead of actually having like real breadcrumbs. The next book I read was Seconds Away by Harlan Coben. I had read this author in 2023, I'm pretty sure, or maybe 2022, and I don't think I liked the book that much. I didn't like the writing. Let me give him a second chance. I've been liking the author. Maybe I'll give this book a chance. I'm glad I did. I gave this shit a 9 out of 10. I was so invested in the story. I was so excited about it. I was like, okay, what's going on? What's next? Who did what? What's da-da-da-da-da? It was so interesting, and I think it's a part of a series. I did not realize that, so I'm like, what happens next? What is even the next book? How am I going to know how to find it and where? But we'll see when we get there. It was so good. It was also a very light and easily digestible read, so I read it really, really quick, which was nice. Then I read Desert Star by Michael Connelly. I gave this book a 7.8. It had an interesting plot, but it wasn't very thrilling. Because it was another like crime story, I want to be in it. I want to see what's going on. I want to be super invested and want more hungry reading, you know? I want to have that effect. It wasn't like pushing me forward to read. Like, I wasn't super like, what's next? What's going on? It was just like, okay, I'm reading. I wrote that they would explain like different mundane actions of the characters that they were doing, and I liked that. It helped bring a humanity of like realism. I don't know, because I don't work in the offices and I'm not a cop, never would be. But brought some of that into there that kind of like grounded the story a bit, but I wanted it to be up in the air, you know? But it's still good. I think I would still recommend this book to people. I read another Michael Connelly book called The Dark Hours. This one I rated a little bit higher. I gave it an 8. Noticed certain random grammar issues. I think that was probably just a quirk that I was like, okay, interesting. There was some propaganda in it, of course, because it's a propaganda book, but it was set in 2020, like during the pandemic and the George Floyd protests and certain things. The way it was written, I was like, yeah, okay. I have strong views about X, Y, and Z things, but I still love to eat down on some propaganda. Cop stories, murder mysteries, all that shit. But when it's actively talking about shit like this, the whole like, we have to fix things from the inside. I think that's like a way a lot of people have thought they become cops, but I don't know, you gotta dismantle the whole system. It's not fixed from the inside. You have to like abolish it and then reconstruct something completely anew. Or some people say. But I still enjoyed the book. Even if the characters themselves didn't share my dark sentiments or dark thoughts, the book was still well written. I like that there was still an acknowledgement of the errors in our justice system. Then I read Wicked. After seeing the movie, I gave this a 9.5. Book 8 down. So many people that asked me about it did not like the book. So I guess this is a controversial thought. I also didn't realize that there are 3 others. It talks about so much more like heavier topics than the musical does. Like the focus of the musical being like the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba is not the focus of the book. Like it talks about religion, tyranny, dictatorship, discrimination. It was super inquisitive and doubtful and had various different perspectives that applied to like the world now. As did the movie, and the musical itself can be an allegory. What is that word? Can be like a metaphor or a parallel to the queer experience, the Black experience, or like the experience as a person of color, just being othered and that type of thing. But this book is not just about being othered. It has that obviously automatically in it, but there's so much more. It's so much deeper than that. It's so much realer than that. It was so good. And I also like things that are a little weird and off, adding like a little horror or a little quirky element, like just changes to that. So this is definitely a book that's up my alley. I like that it was set for a Wizard of Oz, something that's so loved and cared for. I like that it was a weird book that had unsettling moments because it brought parallels of our reality to show the darkness or potential of it in a beloved fantastical world. The final book that I read in 2024 was Monsters We Make, which is Corey Kenshin's manga. Corey Kenshin, the YouTuber. Love down #samurai, because my name is Corey Kenshin. He came back with a manga, something that he had been really dedicating his time to, his efforts to, had a whole team working on, and the art was cool. Read it really quickly. I really liked it. I gave it an 8.9. I gave it a 9. Then I gave it an 8.9 because I was like, oh, am I being biased? But who cares if I'm being biased? There are lots of questions that keep you intrigued, that want you invested. I'm excited to see how the story progresses. I think it's only up from here. Artwork is beautiful. The action scenes were wicked cool. Like, it's just easy to tell that a lot of care and effort went into the work. I think I should just leave it at a 9. And that was all the books that I read in 2024. I have been reading a lot of manga because of Dandadan. So there's gonna be a lot of manga in the end of this year's recap. It's been good. I'm trying to read more. I'm really liking it. Having a lot of fun. Missed reading. Excited to see what types of books I read this year and reflect on it. Thank you so much for watching and staying with me throughout this video. If you liked it, like the video. If you didn't like it, dislike it. If you have something to say, comment down below. Just know that you owe me nothing just as much as I owe you nothing. We are just two strangers, or maybe you're an acquaintance that I have or a friend that I have that just happened to watch my videos. Either way, we're on opposite sides of the screen. We're all our own individual people. We can do whatever the fuck we want because there is free will. And so you don't have to interact with the video if you don't want to. Thanks for watching. But yeah, I posted because I wanted to. Bless.